in our second turn of our 5 Leagues from the Borderlands campaign. The Calamitous Combine are currently trying to fare with the miserable weather. Being caught in a storm, they struggle to maintain their current heading. Spending the night in the storm, the captain was able to find their bearings in the morning. He had discovered that they have been going due south off course. They are recollecting themselves and preparing to sail seas. We start this campaign turn with the preparation stage. Step 1, local events. A roll on the camp event table determines that the stable's light armor is damaged, which must have been caused during the storm. Step 2, hard times. You must pay your upkeep in gold marks, but instead we will plan to use the living off the land activity. In step 3, campaign activities, you get to pick 2 activities that your warband gets to partake during this turn. The first campaign activity is living off the land. By fishing and fixing the ship, they earned their keep, hence paying the upkeep for this turn. The second campaign activity is a hunting expedition. Athena will fish, doing a wilderness check, rolling a 9 for a successful bounty. You then roll on the hunting expedition table to find out your reward. A 4 earns us 3 gold marks. Step 4 will be skipped since we're in the wilderness. In the research step, you seek out connections. Roll of 74, we get an offer for a contract. Rolling on the contract source table, we have an individual contract. Just so happens the captain aboard the ship has a mission for us. He will pay us 1 gold and will become our friend. Rolling on the contract type table reveals that it's an item retrieval to a specific unexplored location. Our captain, Goober, has lost a trinket and would like us to retrieve it for him. Note, I rolled the unexplored location so we can add it to our map. Let's review Captain Goober's contract. So, it's a retrieval of an item, a trinket that was lost. The location, we are getting an unexplored location tag added to King's Fall Mountains. The activity required for our warband is to explore the location and determine if we can retrieve the item. The successful condition is that the item must be brought back to the location where we obtained the contract. We will only have 3 campaign turns in order to obtain the item. Once the item is in our possession, we'll have a further 2 campaign turns to bring it back to get our reward. Now we get to decide our adventure. Since we just accepted the contract, it only makes sense that we explore the location that was provided to us, so that we can retrieve the item. In the final step of the preparation stage, you will equip your warband so that they can undertake their adventure. I haven't changed anything since the beginning, since we haven't had an encounter yet. So we're just going to quickly go over everyone's character sheet before moving on to our adventure. The backpack also contains 4 doses of silver tree leaves. We are now in the adventure stage. We will start by exploring a location. Notice on the map, there is a marker which provides the unexplored location where the item was believed to be lost. Our warband is now off. They get the captain to let him off at shore. They then cross over into the mountains and to the unknown location. We must roll on the travel events table to see what occurs during our trip. Sure enough, we are attacked. The previous travel roll requires us to generate a defensive battle using the roadside enemy table. It's time to set up a battle encounter. The first step is determining the foe. So we rolled on the roadside encounter table 1d100 with a 77. We are going to be facing the Robber Baron Patrol. Their stats have been displayed. They have a number of +2, therefore I have to roll 2d6, and in this case a 4 and a 2, the +2 number, and because this is a defensive battle I have to add another combatant, giving me a 7. Their speed is average with a 4 and a +3 to dash. They have a +1 combat, so they're going to be a bit better than I am over the board. Their damage is +0/+0, therefore using standard weapons. With a toughness of 4, they are a bit tougher than I am, and an armor of 2, having significant amount of armor. They also have 2 crossbows, therefore out of the 7 combatants, 2 of them will be outfitted with crossbows. We also roll a d100 to determine the enemy leadership, rolling a 95, and on that table it comes up with a unique foe. And because this is a defensive battle, there's an added sergeant that gets added to the leadership. Sergeants have the same stats as the Robber Baron Patrol with a +1 toughness, and they have the parry benefit. On a unique foes table, rolling a d100 with a 36, I get a Ruthless Killer. Ruthless Killer has a significant speed of 5, dash of 4, combatant skill of +2. They use a damage that will wound with a +1, with a toughness of 5, making him very tough, and armor of 2. He has the gruesome trait. Any casualties caused by this foe will have a -5 on the injury table, and tough, therefore this foe cannot be stunned. And here we are, the Robber Baron Patrol, the petty noble who sent his band of henchmen to go collect some taxes in the middle of nowhere. And just our luck, we have to face them. These guys are going to be a very difficult crew to take down, especially on our first attempt with starter equipment. Starting from the left, we have 5 standard robbers. Then we have 2 crossbow women, and the sergeant at the far right, the Ruthless Killer. Time to set up a defensive battle. Let's take a look at the battlefield. The battle area is 24 inches by 24 inches square. There are 3 types of terrain to pay attention to. You'll notice that there will be the linear terrain, which can provide cover and also block line of sight. You'll have the area terrain, which will be difficult terrain, but will also provide cover. And finally, there's the block terrain, which you can climb and will also block line of sight. We now deploy our warband. We get to deploy 6 inches from the edge, as you can see here. And you can also see a different view at this point of the warband set up, ready for the encounter. Then you determine outflanking. Since there are none, we skip this step. Now it's time to deploy the enemy. Rolling 2d6 plus 12, on a roll of 7, we end up getting 19. So from the 6 inches to your party warband, you have to count 19 inches, which puts the enemy starting at the edge of the table. They are split evenly and 6 inches apart in their respective groups. The enemy infiltration step. The enemy will try to close the distance before getting detected and launch their attack. So start by selecting the leftmost enemy figure, and we will move it 4 inches forward, trying to get as close as possible to the warband while remaining in cover. Terrain penalties apply as normal. If the figure that's trying to detect them rolls 2d6 and it is greater than the distance, they are spotted and the battle begins. On a 2d6, if the selected figure has a scouting skill, which none of mine do, it would get a +2. If the model moving is partially obscured by terrain, I would get a -1 on my roll. If they are not within sight, I get a -2. Now, if I get double sixes, I automatically spot them when we start the battle. Now this has completed the first full round of every enemy figure moving 4 inches. I have not rolled a 12, and now we will begin again the round anew. Starting again from the leftmost figure, moving 4 inches up. Again, at this point, the figures are still greater than what I can roll. I need double sixes in order to spot any of the foes. As the sun sets, the enemy finds the opportunity to sneak on the warband. Knowing that they'd be distracted, quietly sneak around the rocks and the ruins, making as little noise as possible to gain the advantage and to raid this warband for everything that they have. When fighting defensively, the objective is to fight off the attacker. You have achieved the objectives once half the enemy forces rounded up has been slain or driven off due to morale failures. At that point, you may continue to fight until you hold the field or begin to retreat over the edge of the battlefield. And the last model moves up. Another complete round with no double sixes. Now we're getting ready for the third round. They're moving up. Now at this point, our foes are going to be moving within 8 inches on average. First one, I need to roll a 10, roll a 5. Now this next model will be rolling a 9 to discover. Roll the 4. Still not spotted. And again, another 9 is required. Rolling a 6. Next model moves. Needing a 10 to discover. Rolling a 3. Now it's spotted. Next model again. Another 10 is required. Rolling a 4. Next model moves over. Needs an 11 to discover. Rolled an 8. Next model moves up. And again, 11. Rolling a 7. This model moves up a little bit further. Requiring 9 And finally, we rolled a 9. We have discovered the model. We are about to start the battle. We'll start the first round by rolling for initiative. We'll roll 1 die per warband member. In this game, if your die equals or less than your agility, you can go in the quick action phase. So in this case, we have 3 possible choices. We assign quick actions to Sable, Damien, and Crimson. Sable moves first. She gets in the corner, still in cover in a linear obstacle, and she takes a shot with her self bow, rolling a hit, but can't go through the armor, so the opponent is stunned. In order to hit on a range attack, you have to roll above the target number. Anything greater than 6 and in cover, you have to hit on the 6+. Anything in cover, 5+. Anything that's not in cover, within 6 inches, is a 3+. Now Damien moves and gets ready for a range attack. Target is 9 inches away, and in cover needs 5+. Damien rolls a 3 and misses. Crimson will move up. And since he's going to fight in melee, he's going to move up again, get into difficult terrain, and will also be in cover. Now it's the enemy action phase. Essentially, you will move enemies that are closest to furthest, but you will start with ranged enemies first. So our first ranged enemy is about to take a shot. Being 6 inches away and in cover, a 5+ to hit, roll the 1 and a miss. A 1 always misses, and if it wasn't the first turn, it should be out of ammo. The other crossbow woman moves and gets into cover. Now repeating the process with all the melee fighters, starting from the closest to the furthest. Since none of them are in range to charge and get into melee combat, they will all move and get into cover. And this concludes the enemy action phase. We now move into the slow action phase where the remainder of the warband gets to move. So at this point, Omen will move up and dash to get in a better position, get into cover. Lithia will move and dash as well to get into cover. And we're left with Athena. We'll cast Guidance on Crimson, give him a benefit of a reroll next turn. And in the tracking phase, you resolve all end of round activities, and in this case I forgot to take the stun marker off, but I just did it now. Round 2 begins. We roll for initiative. At this point, only the 2 can be used on Crimson agility of 2, so Crimson goes first. He engages into melee. Melee combat is fought with 3 exchanges. Essentially, both the attacker, which is right now Crimson, and the defender, which is the enemy, roll off. Crimson has a 4, the enemy has a 5, due to his +1 combat skill. In this case, Crimson would have lost the exchange. Since Crimson is affected by guidance, he can force a reroll, whether his or the enemy's. So we will make the enemy reroll. Due to this, Crimson has successfully hit the enemy. He must now roll over his armor score of 2, with 5 that's successful, as well as over the toughness of 4. If it's 6, the target becomes a casualty. Enemy action phase begins. As usual, we start with the Crossbowwoman. She fires, hits with a 5 + 1 on a 6, overcomes the armor, crossbow pushes through +1, and overcomes toughness for a kill. The other crossbow fighter targets Omen, 6 inches away, rolls a 1, misses. Because this is the second round, she's also out of ammo. Next, the closest enemy combatant will enter into melee. It's a series of 3 exchanges. First exchange, enemy rolls a 5 + 1 on 6, Omen rolls a 6. It is a draw. In the case of a draw, both models move 1 inch apart and the exchange ends. This also eliminates all the other exchanges in this combat. Otherwise, it's a head-to-head roll. If the attacker wins, causes a hit to the defender. If the defender wins, the defender will become the attacker for the next exchange. The loser of the exchange must move 1 inch backwards. If it's a player controlling, they get to choose to either continue with the next exchange by moving in, or staying there and eliminating the remainder exchanges. The AI will always move in for another exchange. A total of 3 exchanges are done, and then the melee combat is over. At this point, the remainder of the enemy's combatants move forward, getting into a better position. Sable targets the enemy leader with her self-bow. She rolls a hit, overcomes the armor, but fails to cause a casualty. This creates 1 wound and a stun marker for the enemy leader. Damien targets the enemy sergeant. He must roll a 5+, but gets a 2 and misses. Omen advances to the enemy leader with Brute Charge, using her Great Axe. She rolls a 1. The Brute Charge ability allows a reroll on the first exchange, rolling a 2. The enemy still wins the exchange. The enemy is now the attacker. Omen is pushed back an inch. The enemy leader moves up an inch and engages in the second exchange. The enemy rolls a hit, but the hit fails to overcome Omen's armor. Omen is pushed back again, 1 inch. The enemy moves up again, and a third exchange begins. They both roll off, and it's a draw. Both combatants are moved an inch apart, and the exchange is now over. Athena moves, and then she casts Slow on the 3 enemies in the rough terrain. If a roll of 7 + 1, it's a successful spell. They all move half distance and can't dash for the next turn. Lithia moves, and then she dashes for her 3 inches extra. During the tracking phase, you roll 1d6 for each casualty the enemy sustained. On a 1 or 2, another combatant is removed. In this case, as a 5, nothing happens. We start again round 3 by rolling initiative. Omen will be the only one to be able to act in the quick action phase. Omen will move up and brute charge against the enemy leader again. This time, she rolls a 6, the enemy is a 3, plus 2 is a 5. Omen strikes a hit. She overcomes the enemy armor and his toughness of 5, rolling a 6 + 1 for her Great Axe. She defeats the leader.
Oh!
Now it's the enemy action phase. The crossbowwoman aims at Omen within 6 inches, rolls a hit, rolls to overcome her armor, rolls a 1 on the wound, so Omen will be stunned. Since the other crossbow is out of ammo, she'll just be moving up. The enemy combatant moves into melee against Omen. She rolls a hit, She overcomes Omen's armor, and she overcomes her toughness, taking out Omen. Another enemy moves into melee. First exchange. Athena wins the combat. She is now the attacker. The enemy moves back an inch. Athena moves up. She rolls a 2. The enemy a 4 plus 1 is 5. The enemy wins the exchange. The enemy is now the attacker. This pushes Athena back an inch. The enemy moves up for the third exchange. In the third exchange, the enemy wins a combat roll, pushing Athena back 1 inch. Since this was the third exchange, this is the final melee exchange. The following 3 models have the slow effect. They move half movements, therefore in difficult terrain it's 1 inch, and for the sergeant it's 2 inches out of difficult terrain. Slow action begins with Damien. Damien taking a shot at short range, only needing +3, but he only rolls a 2, missing. Sable fires her self bow, hitting, but since she rolled the exact same number as the armor rating, the opponent is stunned. Lithia moves and engages one of the enemies in the melee. Since the enemy is stunned, she gets +1 on her attack, but still rolling a 3 to the enemy's 5. The enemy is now the attacker. Lithia moves back and the enemy moves forward. The enemy wins a face-to-face roll against Lithia, was able to overcome her armor, but not her toughness. Therefore, Lithia is now wounded and stunned. She moves back an inch, and the enemy moves for exchange 3. The enemy moves in for the final exchange, wins a face-to-face roll, overcomes the armor, and overcomes toughness. Lithia is now a casualty. Athena moves in for the attack. Both roll 4s, but with the +1 combat skill from the enemy becomes the attacker. Athena moves back an inch. Attacker moves, second exchange. In the second exchange, Athena wins the exchange. Athena now becomes the attacker. They both roll off, and another draw. Both combatants move 1 inch away. We now move to the tracking phase. Since there was 1 casualty, we roll 1d6. It was a 3. Nothing happens. We move to the next round. In the 4th round, things are looking pretty grim for our warband, with half of its members down. Rolling for initiative, only 1 member gets to go in the quick action phase. Damien will move to the board's edge. Because he moves 1 inch to the board edge, he will flee the battlefield. In the enemy action phase, range attacks go first. Because it's over 6 inches and the target's in cover, 6+ required. The attack misses. An enemy combatant moves into melee range with Sable. The enemy wins the face-to-face roll. Since there's no armor, they also overcome her toughness. Sable becomes a casualty. An enemy combatant moves into melee with Athena. They both roll off, and it's a draw. Both characters move 1 inch away. Another enemy moves into melee with Athena. They win the combat roll, but roll the armor. So Athena is stunned. She goes again on the second exchange, wins a combat roll, overcomes the armor, but not the toughness. So Athena is now wounded. On a third exchange, they roll off. It's a draw. Both move away. Athena can't because she's against a wall. The enemy sergeant now moves into melee. striking a hit, as well as overcomes her armor, and she becomes a casualty. Our warband has suffered a great loss on their first encounter in the land of Nalaria. They have been defeated and have failed their objective. The enemy now pursues Damien into the mountains. After an encounter, we move to the resolution stage. Step 1. Collect adventure points. The only points we're able to collect is since we defeated a unique foe, we gain 2 adventure points. In our second step, we check for injuries and flight in the dark. Unfortunately, the warband took heavy casualties. Athena rolls death. Sable, Crimson, Lithia, and Damien are all injured. Looks like the enemy caught up to Damien while he ran away. I'll use a story point to reroll Athena's death roll, and a silver tree leaf to reroll Sable's injuries. The results are much better. Athena now is knocked out, and Sable will lose her self-bow. That still leaves half of our warband out of commission for a minimum of at least 3 turns. The next step, step 3, we check for advancement. The only one that got 1 XP for killing a unique foe is Omen, so Omen gets 1 XP added to her character sheet. Since we have not held the ground or met the objectives, we do not roll for step 4 or 5. After the encounter resolution, we can go back to the adventure step. We now have arrived to the unexplored location. We roll off, and we found a monster's lair. We will attempt to breach on this turn. With a +8 scouting roll, I roll Snake Eyes. +1 for the contract, but I'll have to camp for the remaining of the turn. This will conclude our turn. We will settle in and camp in the wilderness. We'll begin the next turn in camp. In step 7, news travels. We roll on a news table. With a 13, some travelers have ran into us. They say they saw something odd. We will add an unexplored location to our map. As the warband settles for the night, tending their wounds, they're thinking hard whether they should be breaching the monster's lair with a half-capable crew or going to town and get some healing. Either way, Athena is going to have to rethink and be a bit more cautious in her actions in the future. We will see you on our next turn.